Hi, my name is Shane Fichter, and I am a strong believer that where we are in our life, the decisions we make, the success that we have, how far we've come, the relationships we've created is all deeply tied to our self worth. The story that we're telling ourselves in our head on a day to day basis about us and the world around us, what we're capable of, what we're not capable of. And for many of us, at a very young age, we start creating this story about ourselves based on our mistakes and our failures or heavy and hard things that have happened in our life. We start telling ourselves, I'm not good enough because, right? I could never own a business like that. I was a drug addict, or I could never own a business like that. My mom and dad never started a business, they worked a 9 to 5. I could never own a house like that. I was homeless. And for a long time, my story in my head was I'm just a drug addict like my mom. I'm a poor kid from the ghetto, and I'm justified to do these things that I was doing in my life. See, my mom was a drug addict my whole life, and my father committed suicide when I was 13. And that was kind of when I started smoking and drinking and using drugs and partying. And then at the age of 17, I was prescribed Vicodin for whiplash. I always had really good work ethic, but I was always popping pills in the background, partying, always looking for something and chasing something that I would say was not true to myself, all because of this story that I was telling myself in my head on a day to day basis. By the time I was 25, I had multiple overdoses. I had robbed someone at gunpoint. I was, for a long time thought that I was going to be like El Chapo or something and make money and get my lift off in life from this bad life that I was living. I was telling myself, I was dealt a bad hand. I am justified to do the things that I'm doing. And I really just ran myself into the ground and ended up in jail and ended up hitting rock bottom, having a 35-day withdrawal off of opiates and meth and pretty much anything I could get my hands on. But that rock bottom is honestly what woke me up. I finally ended up after this 35-day withdrawal with my back against the wall. I had burned every bridge. I was alone. I couldn't blame anybody else for where I had put myself. I had put myself there. I couldn't blame my mother. I couldn't blame my past anymore. And what I ended up doing was letting go of control and started journaling, started meditating, started controlling the only thing I could control, which was me, and myself and my own actions. I started working out. I started diving into changing who I was and the way I thought. I was actually very interested and curious as to why I became the person I became and how I got there. I started working out every day. I started working in the kitchen inside the jail. I started letting go of everything else that was going on in the outside world, and I just started looking within. Now, from me having, small successes and small wins, I believe that that's where my mindset started to change. Um, I started learning about myself. I started looking at all of these things that I had told myself about me, right? Well, I ended up going to treatment. And while I was at treatment, we ended up doing this thing called a timeline. They had us write out all the good and bad experiences that we had happen in our life and showing us how we escalated to get to our crime. Well, later when I was coaching, this is actually one of the exercises I feel that changed my life forever. So I ended up being locked up and in treatment for about a year and a half. And I ended up relocating to a new town and going to pre release, which is like a halfway house. And I'm working out, I'm doing drywall, and I end up going to some MMA fights. And I ended up remembering how much I loved wrestling and doing jujitsu as a kid. And the very next day, I went into the gym, the grindhouse, and I started training like a heroin addict. I started channeling that addictive and compulsive behavior towards something positive. And I started doing really good in the sport in a very short period of time. I started realizing that a lot of these other fighters that had been training MMA their whole life, they didn't have the unique qualities that I had because of my childhood, because of where I came from. I started owning that story. I started telling my story. People started asking, like, what makes you think that you're going to make it to the big show? Why do you feel like you're going to be successful? And I would always say, because I've climbed through glass to get here, I will climb through glass to get there, right? I started noticing that my rough childhood, my drug addiction, gave me resilience. It gave me strength. It made me marketable. For a long time in my childhood, I had to problem solve to get around things. I was a very good problem solver, right? So I fought MMA for about 5 years. And in that time, I went to Thailand, trained and fought over there. I fought in a world tournament in Colorado called the King of Sparta. I trained with a lot of big name MMA fighters like Gilbert Burns, Robbie Lawler, Alistair Overeem, all of these guys. And what that showed me, because I went from literally shooting drugs into my arm to 4.5, 5 years later, training with some of the best fighters in the world, is it showed me that when I channel myself and I start changing that story of what I think I'm capable of, and I start changing that story of what I think the world, has in store for me, that I could do anything. I actually also learned that a lot of these people, these fighters, these entrepreneurs, these millionaires, these influencers, we put them on this huge pedestal when in all actuality, they're just humans like me and you. They eat cheeseburgers. They are just as human as I am and just as human as you are. They make mistakes. They fall on their face. They fail. So about 5 years into my MMA career, I ended up walking into a left hand and getting a concussion and having to retire from MMA. But I felt like I already knew where I was going. So I was already journaling, I was already meditating, and I had done all of these self development acts my whole experience. So I knew where I was going. I was already speaking at Rimrock, which is a treatment facility, telling my story. I knew I wanted to be a motivational speaker. I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. So after that concussion and having to retire from MMA, I came back to Montana and I started a drywall business because I had done drywall my whole life, called the Patch Guy. It was very successful. And not long after that, I started my first cobble bar. The Patch Guy in the very first year made 250,000 gross revenue. Once again, because I channeled that addictive and that compulsive behavior, and I changed why I thought that I was able to be successful. See, like I said earlier, we all have these hard things that happen in our life, and what they usually tell us is, I'm not good enough. I'm different than those people. I come from a different place, and a lot of times the ones that have had the harder life are the ones that think less of themselves. When in all actuality, life is the biggest lesson and the biggest teachings that you're going to get. I feel like they're the most powerful lessons that you're going to have. So in all actuality, that person that was homeless is probably, if they can channel the belief systems and they can channel their behavior and their discipline, are probably more likely to do great things than the ones that weren't. As a child, we lived in poverty. Me and my mom, we had to, I had to went to 9 different high schools, or 9 different elementary schools, and 3 different high schools. Sorry, but in that time, we moved around a lot. I had to problem solve. We had to figure things out. I had to be a problem solver where most kids didn't have to be a problem solver. And I later found out that that is what helped me be an entrepreneur, right? So that exercise that I talked about earlier that I did in treatment, where we wrote out all of our good and bad experiences throughout of our life, showing how we escalated to get to our crime. I was later working with a coach, like a business coach, a mindset coach, and I was learning all about limiting beliefs. And I started, um, you know, writing out limiting beliefs. I started looking at them from a different way, and I ended up finding that piece of paper, that timeline, and I looked at it, and I ended up going through this timeline and finding all of those bad experiences that had happened through my life, and I started journaling about them. I started asking myself, what skills, talents, and traits have I adapted from this situation? Like, how have I benefited from this thing that's happened in my life? And it would blow your mind if you were to do it to yourself, how capable and talented you truly are from these hard things that happened in your life. I'm a great entrepreneur. I'm a great problem solver. And just to give you an example, when I was like 4 or 5 years old, my mom would take me to the liquor store and she would give me a $1 food stamp, right? When food stamps were still the little ticket, it was still a little piece of paper. And for any of you out there in the world that don't know what food stamps are, but in America here, if you're low income or you're on welfare, they will give you these tickets, kind of like money, so that you can buy food with them. But my mom would have me go in and buy a sucker or a small piece of candy for a dime or 10 cents, for part of a dollar. And then they would actually give her back real change, real dimes and nickels and coins. So then she could get toilet paper, beer, a pack of cigarettes, whatever she needed to get. So she would have me do that 4 or 5 times. And then next thing you know, she would have a whole handful of change to buy other things that we might need besides food. These are the types of problem solving skills that I was raised around my whole childhood. But for a long time, I thought we weren't good enough because of food stamps. I thought that we were different than everybody else because we were poor, right? So after my first kava bar, I ended up opening a second kava bar, and then I started Havoc Mindset. And what Havoc Mindset is all about is we all have havoc in our life, havoc from our past that we create limiting beliefs about. I'm not good enough. I'm different than others. When in all actuality, this havoc is what makes us resilient. It's what creates us to be the person that we're supposed to be. And as you continue to go through hard things in life, because you will, I have found that if you focus on your self development, you double down on all of those things that you usually toss to the wayside when you're going through hard things, like therapy, going to the gym. If you double down on these things, these hard situations will actually catapult you forward because you're reflecting on these hard situations. But most importantly, you're starting to learn why you're different than other people because of these things that you've been through. We all have unique qualities about ourselves, and a lot of them come from the hardest situations that you've had in your life. I would definitely say that after turning my life around and fighting MMA and having failures, I learned that I'm just adding tools to my arsenal every single time I go through a hard situation. And as of now, my name's Shane Fichter, like I said, but I own a business called Havoc Mindset. I'm a motivational speaker. I'm a mindset coach. I help a lot of business owners and clients that I have that want to become business owners change the way they think of themselves and the world around them. I help people find what they're passionate about. I help people learn to look at these struggles and turn them into their superpower, because we all have struggles that are our superpower. You find your why, right? Like what motivates you and what keeps you going and what gets you out of bed in the morning. You start implementing habits that remind you of your why. You start implementing habits that remind you what you're passionate about, and you continue to keep pushing through and not give up. Try to adapt that havoc mindset, right? That mindset that tells you that every hard situation that I go through is just another superpower. Every hard situation that I go through is just making me a better human being and somebody that can help somebody else that went through a hard situation. Now, sometimes it's very hard to wrap your mind around these things when you've had really, really hard, big trauma in your life. I've had a coaching client that said, you know, my dad used to beat the hell out of me every day. How is that a superpower of mine? Like, how is that helping me get ahead? How is that helping me, you know, impact the world? And what I had said to him was, well, if you can overcome all this trauma and you can change your mindset around it and you can heal from these things that have happened in your life, how many people can you help that are probably going through the same thing? And one thing that I do know about people like me that have been through a lot of trauma is you end up having a lot of empathy for others and you want to help. So adapt that havoc mindset and start turning those struggles that you have in your life into your superpower by changing the perception of the way you see those and yourself. Have a great day.